Hi everyone. Today I'd like to share with you a technique of watering that's probably the most natural way to water an orchid that's not in bark or in moss. And it's by no means a novel way of watering. In fact, there are many people online that swear by it. And it's very effective because in nature, these roots are never bunched together anywhere. They are never soaking in water in a vessel like this for any amount of time, and they are never in bark or moss in a container. Rather, they're usually high up in the trees, among the branches of the trees, where they attach to, and also attach to the trunks of the trees. And furthermore, the roots, or the individual roots, go their own way and kind of like make a life for themselves in a different place than the other roots. And in this way, they can be more successful in ultimately finding water and nutrients. So I got to thinking, what else happens when they're out there in nature? Well, there are periods of time, sometimes brief, sometimes more extended, where the roots get rained on. And the velamen of the root, which is this silvery covering of what's called the cortex, which is a very fine thread of a root inside of this, achieves maximum saturation after about 20 minutes. The point being that it could rain for hours, and there's only so much water that the roots will take in during that time period. So during the rain shower or storm, the velamen turns a dark green. And then 1 to 2 hours after the rain abates, it goes back to being this light colored green. Some people refer to it as silvery green. And at that point, the orchid is once again dried out. So there is this give and take between being watered and then drying out. And that happens all the time. So I'm figuring, what's the best way that I can mimic a rainstorm or a rain shower here in New York, in my house. I don't have a greenhouse. I just have a room where I have my orchids. So in order to achieve a maximum saturation weight for each of the orchids that I was testing, I came up with a little system. And that involved having a history of the waterings. And you see from here, you see this word test. The test began on September 3rd. And then I ended it around October 24th, and I just went back to normal waterings every week after I got the orchid up to what I believe to be a maximum saturation weight. And then down on the vase itself, I have the history of the MSWs achieved as we went through the month. And in this case, we started out with 23.9 ounces. And by the time we were done, that's October 14th, we're up to 25 ounces for a total gain of 1.1 ounces. Well, you might be saying 1.1 ounces, that's not a lot of water to be taken in over the period of a month. However, what you don't realize is that this weight of 23.9 was the original weight of the orchid in the vase. The orchid itself only weighed 5.8 ounces. So the addition of 1.1 ounces to the original weight of the orchid of 5.8 represents a weight gain of approximately 19%, which is considerable. So let me show you the whole process that's involved, and then you can decide whether or not it's good for you. So I always water early morning when water uptake is the greatest. And what I do is I'll shoot in a 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce of water. That's a 1/2 ounce. And what I'm trying to do is to get all of the roots that I can see to turn dark green. And as you can see, it's happened, and it's also nice and humid in here now. But there are still some roots that are not dark green, so I'm going to spray another 1/2 ounce in there and try to get them to where they're all dark green. Okay, let's see how that turns out. And it's looking pretty good now. Everything's dark green. I've sprayed in 1 ounce of water. There is residual water floating around on the base of the vase. And some of the root tips are sitting in that residual water. That being done, the next thing I do is I wait between a 1/2 hour to an hour, at which point I dump whatever residual water is left. Now this is really important because it gives the orchid 23 to 23.5 hours to dry out. And then you just do the same thing the next day. And then slowly but surely you arrive at a maximum saturation weight. And it's at that point that you can return to a regular weekly watering schedule. Surprisingly, what you'll find is that an orchid this size will rarely take in more than 1 ounce of water per week. And that's in a normal, average home setting. Well, thanks for joining me once again. And if you decide to try this method out, I'd recommend starting small, maybe 1 or 2 orchids at the most, and see how much of your time it takes up, because that's really an important consideration.